but he couldn't be here today, which is not that I've bumped him off to get moderating duties. I think he's all happy and healthy. Am I not on? I'm on now? Yeah. Shall I start again? So I'd like to thank Tony for putting the panel together. He's not here today because he couldn't get the budget to travel over, but he is alive and well. I didn't bump him off to jump on moderation duties. But we're just going to dive straight in. Please come up with really good interrogating questions because the lovely people on stage have agreed to brave it and give you answers to those questions. So we're talking about rethinking peer review today. And a lot of this is going to be centered around preprints, so all I'm going to do is give you a very quick, same-page introduction on preprinting. Preprints are great. If you know anything about me, you know I say that on such a daily basis, it is now a drinking game. But they basically make work available almost immediately. So you post your preprint to a preprint server, and within 48 hours, even at the height of the pandemic, within 48 hours, for the most part, your preprint would then appear online, available for everyone to read. This is contrasted on the bottom there with the current system where you submit to a journal, it might reject it, and then you submit to however many more journals until eventually somebody accepts your work. So to define what a preprint is, preprints are scientific manuscripts that are openly shared online prior to journal-organized peer review. I'm not going to go through the list of things they are. I want to focus on the things that they are not. So preprints are not necessarily preliminary or early work. I've spent months trying to identify those, and it's really difficult. They are not low quality or incomplete manuscripts, and they are not rushed work. If you do want to learn more, there's a report that came out last month on the state of preprints right up to the end of last year. Currently, we're sitting on around 1 million life science preprints. This is based on EuroPMC data, so it's a little bit lower than what is actually true. Because they index around 34 preprint servers, whereas there are about 50 with a life science focus. I've chosen to pull out bioRxiv and medRxiv just to highlight that post-pandemic there was a little dip in the number of new preprints each year, but both of those servers have since recovered and are back to growing as they were before the pandemic. This sounds great, but it's also important to remember that preprints are still, as a percentage of the overall literature, relatively small, so they're around 11%. Again, this is EuroPMC data, so that there's a bit of movement in there. Preprint evaluation actually remains quite low, so EuroPMC data, they mark whether a preprint is associated with a non-journal organized evaluation, and around 2% of preprints on EuroPMC are associated with that. So it's quite a low number. And if you look at this data across the years, I think something quite interesting comes out, which is it looks like bioRxiv preprints are being reviewed less now, whereas I've grouped them into other there, but a lot of the OSF servers, for example, those preprints seem to be getting evaluated more often than they used to. And I'm not entirely sure what's going on there, but I thought it was interesting. And with that, the whole ecosystem around preprint feedback is growing. So there are, like I said, around 50 preprint servers with a life science focus now. There are around 20 different preprint reviewing platforms, and you're going to hear about a few of those today, but these range from quite free-form social media posts, things that are not very structured necessarily, right through to things that are very much like a journal-organized peer review. So eLife is sort of the classic example of a journal one. And then there's also on top of this a whole layer now of linking and discovery tools. I think we're going to hear a little bit more about Society here as well, which is something that eLife also run. And together this is creating an ecosystem that is growing, and I think the slide actually is already out of date a little bit. So it's going quite rapidly. But with that, I will hand over to Katherine.
Hi, thanks everybody. Can you hear me? Good. Okay, thanks. So I'm Katherine Brown. I'm the publishing director of the company of Biologists. And I'm not going to talk you through this slide, but this really is, so I come with a bunch of perspectives to this panel, but my sort of main hat is that we are a relatively traditional publisher, and we've gone on a real journey over the last decade from what I would describe as a sort of preprint skeptic, where we didn't allow preprinting only 12 years ago, through to, I think, one of the publishers that is most supportive of the preprint literature and has done quite a lot in this space. And that's shown on here, but I'm not going to sort of take you through that. Instead, I'm going to focus on the two sort of big initiatives that I think we're involved in very quickly. and that's Prelights, which is a preprint highlighting platform, and our partnership with Review Commons. So very briefly, Prelights is not peer review of preprints. What it is instead is really a platform that allows early career researchers, or primarily early career researchers, to highlight and discuss the preprint literature. So they write about preprints that they're interested in, they get involved in discussions with the authors of those preprints about questions that they've got, and they post those out into the public. And the idea behind this was really to help the community to curate the ever-growing preprint literature, which is getting sort of more and more overwhelming to some extent. So how do you find the relevant preprints? And this is one of our efforts to help that. And the other thing that Prelights has actually allowed us to do is also to really build a network of early career researchers who are interested in the preprint literature, and to help to support their sort of careers as they're navigating through that space. And I'm happy to answer any more questions about that. The second thing that we're involved with, which I think is more related to actual formal peer review, is Review Commons. Review Commons is an initiative launched by EMBO back in 2019, and this is true journal agnostic peer review. So authors submit a paper to the Review Commons platform. It undergoes peer review with the reviewers not having any idea which journal the paper might end up in. When the authors then get their set of peer review reports back, they can then choose which of the affiliate journals they want to submit to, and those journals commit to using the peer review reports that Review Commons has generated in order to make a decision on those manuscripts. There are now 29 affiliated journals. Again, that may be slightly out of date. Authors are also completely within their rights to take those peer review reports and submit to a completely different journal. They don't need to stay within the Review Commons stable, but of course they're taking a bit of a gamble there about whether that journal will use those reports or not. So where is Review Commons at the moment? It's relatively small, and I think one of the things that I'm really interested in actually hearing some feedback on is why is this not taking off to some extent? The data all say that for authors this is good. Their papers go to fewer journals before being accepted. The process is quicker. They have to do fewer revisions because they've got one set of portable peer review reports, and yet the numbers of papers are still relatively low. But they've now published nearly 1,500 papers since launch. Majority of the papers they get do go out for peer review, and the vast majority of them do end up being published in one of their affiliate journals. And again, I'm not expecting you to see the details on that pie chart, but it's really just to show that those papers end up at a wide range of the affiliated journals, and I think we all benefit from it. We're now starting to get more involved in Review Commons by actually starting to take on the handling of the peer review for some of those papers as well. But yeah, I'm happy to talk more about any of those initiatives, and I will hand over to Thomas.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yes, great, thank you. So I'm going to talk about peer community and peer community journals. So I'm Thomas Guillemot from Peer Community In. Peer Community In is a non-profit and non-commercial organization, okay? And it is like an alternative way of publication from preprint evaluation to publication in a Diamond open access journal. So basically what we do is that we ask authors to deposit the article into preprint server, and then they can submit the article to one of the many thematic PCIs. Okay, we have 21 thematic PCIs in different subjects, ecology, genomics, etc., and registered reports, so that they submit the article, their preprint, into one of these PCIs. We make a peer review. I think that there is a Larsen problem with the sound. Okay, so we make like a classic evaluation procedure of the preprints with several rounds of peer reviews, etc., and an editorial decision at the end, which is binary, accept, reject. And when a preprint is accepted, we write what we call a recommendation text, which is a text where the editor explains the reasons why they decided to accept the article based on the peer reviews. And then we publish everything. All the evaluation procedure is published on the PCI website, peer reviews, editorial decisions, answers from the authors, etc. So the biggest PCI is PCI registered reports. It's half the work of the PCI, just for information. And then, once an article has been accepted by a PCI, has been PCI recommended, we offer the possibility to the authors to publish directly into the Peer Community Journal, which is a free journal in open access, in Diamond Open Access. And this is just optional. We just offer this possibility to the authors, but they can choose to submit the article elsewhere. Okay, they can submit the article to PCI-friendly journals. We have more than 100 of them, and this is about 20% of the total recommendations by PCI. Or they can do whatever they want with their PCI recommended article, like just staying in the preprint server. So this is just an example of peer reviews and recommendation text that we publish on the PCI website. It is in open access, it is for free, it is searchable and findable. It has every item as a DOI, etc. And at the end of the process, I already told you that we offer the possibility to the authors to publish in the peer community journal directly with no further evaluation and for free because it is a Diamond Open Access journal. Or they can submit the article into one of the 100 PCI-friendly journals. And depending on the category of the PCI-friendly journals, it can be very fast or less fast. And they also can submit into any other journal of their choice. And if they are not happy with the editorial decisions of all these journals, they can go back to the peer community journal where they know that the article will be published. And it's a way globally to regain, to give authors back some power and for them to decide where and if to publish in journal. Thank you very much.
Okay. Okay, can you hear me? Okay, so this is how Publish, Review, Curate works at eLife, starting at the left. Authors can either upload a preprint to a preprint server and transfer it to the journal, or they can transfer it, submit it directly to us, and if we select it for peer review, we will post it to the preprint server for them. The first thing, so that means that you don't have to sort of publish it as a preprint and then have it rejected, have it not sent for peer review. It's in the hands of the authors where it's pre-printed or not. We review possibly, I'd say, about a third of the articles that are submitted to us. That's sometimes, and they're typically, as with most journals, there's 2 or 3 reviewers. That process is overseen by a system of senior editors who consult with our reviewing editors and basically decide if the submission is going to be reviewed or not. The basic, there's an editorial written that explains why that is, but basically we have to find a reviewing editor who is sufficiently interested in the paper. It has to seem sufficiently important or rigorous for them to want to spend their time overseeing the review process. Possibly the most discussed, most unique feature of the process is there's no rejection after peer review. Everything that is sent for review is published. The decision that's sent to the authors includes something called an eLife assessment that I'll say a bit more about in the next slide, public reviews which discuss the strengths and weaknesses of the article, and more detailed comments called recommendations for the authors. All that material, when the review process concludes, is sent to the authors, and they're given 2 weeks to respond. They can both, if there's any factual inaccuracies they want to bring to our attention, or if they want to submit a preliminary response that can be published with the article and the reviews. And so then all of that is published as what we call a reviewed preprint, and that includes the eLife assessment, the public reviews, and the author response. If there is one, at this stage, the vast majority of authors decide to revise their article in response to the reviews, so it goes back into the system. That arrow should actually probably point to the peer review and consultation, but basically the editors and reviewers will decide if they want to change the eLife assessment, if they want to change the public reviews, if they think the authors have dealt with the points from the referees. Generally what happens is that after that one round of revision, the review process concludes and the article is published as a standard version of record, like a traditional journal article. It is possible at these stages for the authors to submit to another journal, but that happens very, very rarely. I think we're aware, since we've been doing this for 3 years, and we're aware of 14 papers that have been published elsewhere. Okay, this is what it looks like. Basically, I want to draw your attention to what I mentioned earlier, the eLife assessment. So this is a short summary of what the reviewers and the editor thought of the paper. And the two things I want to draw your attention to are we use a controlled vocabulary to summarize the significance of the findings. So that's on a scale that, you know, the highest level is landmark and then fundamental and important. And we also down to useful. And we also summarize the strength of the evidence, and that's in the scale that goes all the way from inadequate at the bottom to exceptional at the top. That assessment can change as a result of the revision process, and we've found that roughly in 40% of the papers, the term for the strength of evidence is that changes to a better term, and in about 20% of papers, the term for significance has changed. Okay. And then the last thing I'm going to talk about is SCIED. SCIED, we set this up as a place where people could find reviews of preprints from all sorts of places, and there's some facts and figures there on the numbers and the reviews and the groups that we use SCIED. The one thing we think, you know, and there are many, you might think they're all the usual suspects. We do think there's potential for greater use by other learned societies, and we're hoping to work on that. The other thing that SCIED is which is less obvious if you visit the site, is actually it's a piece of infrastructure, and used by eLife obviously and by some other journals. And at eLife, it's one of a number of pieces of infrastructure we use, along with Kotahi and Hypothesis and Creodocs and EJP, etc., etc. So that's it from me. Thank you.
So one of the things that came up from yesterday's panel was they were presenting all these problems with peer review, so difficulty finding reviewers, a lot of these issues that are in the system. Could you talk a little bit about how you're solving some of those problems? So maybe Katherine talk about pre-lights and how pre-lights is a really great way of sort of engaging that extra audience.
So I think for us, as I said before, I think pre-lights is not a peer review service, and we're very clear about that. We are not asking our pre-lighters, this community of early career researchers, to provide formal peer review of a manuscript. But what it has done for us as a publisher is provided us with a group of people who we know are interested in assessing papers. And so we have found that actually our pre-lights community make very good early career reviewers for our journals. And I think one of the things that was talked about yesterday was that there's a big disconnect with the people who are asked to review and the people who want to review. And so it's, you know, it's old Westerners who are being asked to review, and it's earlier career people and perhaps people from the East who are less invited to do peer review. Now, I'm not going to pretend we've got great reach outside of the West with our pre-lights community, although we're really working on that. But we have really tapped into an early career research community who want to get involved in the assessment of papers. And we found that a lot of our editors are now starting to invite those pre-lighters to undertake formal peer review of papers, and we hope that that is really opening the doors to sort of the next generation of researchers. We also support them. We provide feedback on their assessments of papers within pre-lights, so while again we don't provide formal training in peer review, although we do run the odd workshop on that, we do provide them with some sort of initial steps in there. And I think there are other initiatives out there. I think, you know, pre-review, there's nobody on this panel representing pre-review, but I think they're an organisation who've done even more in that space in really helping to diversify the pool of people who are out there to review papers. They've actually got, I don't know if it's still active, they had a database of early career researchers who want to review papers. And so again, I think if people are looking to diversify their peer review pools, then there are some people out there who you can find, because I think the problem is you can't find these people. But tools like this provide you ways of finding people who want to review papers, and also some evidence that they can do a good job of reviewing papers.
And Thomas, PCI have done a really good job with engaging doctoral schools. So could you talk a little bit about that in terms of the incentives around peer review and preprints?
Yeah, so PCI, we have two very strong characteristics. The first characteristic is that we are very small and not well known, and this implies that we have difficulties to find some reviewers because they just don't know us. Okay, so when they receive an invitation, they just hesitate to go to work for us. Yeah, so this is the first thing. But the second strong characteristic is that we are very community friendly and we work for the scientists, we are scientists, etc. And this is obvious from the outside. So that when the invited reviewers, when they know PCI, in general, they accept to review for PCI. And this is very important for us because there are these two characteristics and they are conflicting, etc. But we think that if we grow and grow, then we will have more and more facility to recruit some new reviewers. And there is also something else, which is the fact that we have many people working as associate editors in each thematic PCIs. For instance, in PCI ecology, we have something like 400 recommenders working as associate editors. And this enlarges a lot the network of the possible peer reviewers. And this is very good for us because it makes them known that PCI exists and it makes them work for PCI and avoid like the private club effect, which is very, very important. And I'm not sure that I reply exactly to your question, but there is something that we have set up to improve the process of peer review that I think is very, very efficient. It is what we call the scheduled peer review process. We do that at PCI registered report for now, just in PCI registered report. It's a way to gain time, to accelerate a lot the process, whereby the authors make an appointment with the editors and the reviewers for, let's say, in a month. They take an appointment and they will submit the article in a month. And they know that once they submit the article, the peer review process will take a week because everybody will be ready to make the job of evaluation. The peer reviewers, the editor, everybody. So they just submit a snapshot in advance. They take the appointment for, let's say, in a month, and then there is this scheduled peer review that takes place at this time. And this accelerates a lot the whole process. And we think that we are going to generalize this process of scheduled peer review for the other PCIs. So yeah, some elements.
And you can't change systems unless someone is either stupid enough or brave enough to push forward and do a lot of changes. And eLife have kind of been that publisher who've been doing that. Could you talk a little bit about how eLife have engaged with the research community throughout all of that?
Yeah, well, like Thomas, we have a large board of senior editors and an even larger board of reviewing editors. So you could say they are, part of the scientific research community. And they have been involved. We also have, at the time we introduced our model, we have an early career advisory committee and they were involved in discussions as well. But by and large, it has to be decisive. And if you left it to consensus in a vote, a lot of people were reluctant to make the move. But it was decided that change had to happen, and you can't. You do your best to take everyone with you, but you can't. So we just, we probably. There's been various things where there's been consultations and lots of emails and Q&As and what have you. But at the end of the day, you have to be decisive and make a move, and accept that not everyone will come with you.
We do have microphones somewhere in the audience as well. If anyone has questions. Yeah, right in the middle.
Yes, so I'm Dennis Brown from the Harvard Medical School, and I completely agree that peer review needs to be reorganized. But I have two comments. The first of which is that listening to everybody and hearing everybody at this conference, and as my experience as a scientist, it's getting really, really complicated out there to know where to submit the paper, which is the best process to go through, and to me, it's like acronym soup. You've just got to look at the slide up here. And so, I urge people to get together. It seems to be done on a publisher-by-publisher basis rather than getting together and reinventing. It used to be in the old days, we would write a paper, we would send it to a journal, it would get reviewed, it would come back. And we didn't have to worry about all of this stuff. Now, I agree that that's a little bit of a flawed system, but right now, I'm not sure that these different systems are improving things because It's just so complicated. We have no means of validating each system. We have no means of assessing its worth, and we don't know what the future is going to hold for all of these different systems either. So yes, change is needed, but it needs to be systematic and more coordinated, I think, rather than that. And if that's not enough, I have one more point. And that's that the preprint servers, I'll tell you the main reason we use preprint servers, and I use them all the time, and that's to get funding. We've sent grants off and they said, oh, you know, you're a postdoc or you haven't published anything. So we dumped something on a preprint server, and then because NIH realized that that's a product now, they didn't used to, but in the last few years they do, it's considered one step up maybe from an abstract, but less than a full paper, review paper, but it helps us to get funding. So we want to get things out there, yes we do, but we also do this pragmatically in order to speed up the funding process.
So to turn that into a question for everyone, do you think each of your initiatives actually go far enough in terms of improving things? Because you're talking about speeding things up, and I think you all do a decent job of speeding things up, but do you think you go further than that in improving peer review?
So I think on your first point about getting together, I completely agree, and I think that one of the lovely things about Review Commons, it is still small, I recognise that, but it does represent, I think, about 12 different publishers. At the moment, largely not-for-profits, although there is at least one journal that is Springer Nature owned in there. So, I think this is an attempt to try and bring some people together to do something that is bigger and beyond just a single publisher. And as I say, I think it started out as very much an EMBO initiative, and we sort of bought in a little bit. And now I think the affiliate journals are beginning to get more involved in actually running that process and doing it in a collaborative way across publishers. Does it need to grow to have any impact? Absolutely. Do we need to do more work to make it grow? Of course we do. But I do think that's a first step in trying to make some of those things the sort of bigger process. So I think that's something. And on your point about preprints, absolutely. Everybody has their own reasons for submitting preprints, and I think the one that you articulate is probably one of the most compelling. But the reality is that what they do is speed up science, and they provide us with an opportunity to layer on some of these additional services that some people will really want to engage with, some people don't care about it. That's fine. I think the most important thing is that your research is then out there, you can use it, other people can use it, journals can pick up on it, and it provides that whole space for some of this experimentation that may or may not change the publishing world, but at least gives us a way of starting to make some inroads into it.
Maybe I'll answer by saying, earlier I spoke about how the eLife model works. I didn't really say why we do it, and that might help. One of the things is, under the old system, there was a lot of work that went into peer review that then just disappeared, never saw the light of day. It just manifested itself in a paper being published or rejected. So I think that was a great waste, and a lot of these, move to open review, whether it's PRC or not, at least makes that work visible, and it's possible to give credit to the people who do it. So I think that's a useful development. I think the old system was very, very slow, and especially if an article was rejected, the authors almost went right back to square one and had to start again. So that was certainly a flaw of the old system. And I think under the old system as well, a lot of articles got judged by the name or the impact factor of the journal they were in, rather than by the science. If you just scraped over the bar, or if you cleared the bar by meters, it didn't matter. You were in this journal. So I think, the old system, it was good, but there was plenty of flaws in it and plenty of things that needed attention.
Yeah, if I may, just on this point, I think it's very, very important to be very transparent on the evaluation procedures and on the peer reviews and the editorial decisions. And it's a way to avoid this, the image of a journal, like a package of quality, but in fact you don't know why there is this image of quality attached to a journal. But if you can look at the evaluations, if you can look at the peer reviews and the editorial decisions, then you can have an idea of why we think that this journal is indeed a journal of quality or not. And we think at PCI that the transparency of the evaluation is one of the ways to solve many of the problems. And if I may also, we do not share exactly the same problems, okay? Some authors have scientific problems, some authors have visibility problems, and some authors have financial problems. And for many countries in Europe, like southern countries, but even France, Germany, etc., there are problems of finance for the publication process. It is too expensive, and libraries and universities just can't afford to publish in open access, for instance. And what we try to do at PCI, for instance, is to solve a tiny bit of this problem by offering a system which is not costly at all, okay, that costs to the scientific community a very low amount of money, and we offer publication in diamond open access to the authors. So the laboratories do not pay for that, the readers do not pay for that, it's just the institution who pay for that, but at very, very low cost. And we think we solve a part of the problem.
So you've got a question in the middle again, Bahar, still? Yeah. In yellow, right in the middle. Yeah.
Thank you. This is Bahar Mehmani. I'm from Elsevier and president of EASE. I just wanted to comment on Katherine's point about where is pre-review. I can tell you where they are because I jointly ran an experiment with them with one of the journals in neuroscience that we publish, and we decided to run an experiment and see the effect of choosing one of these services as peer review, the impact on the speed of the peer review process and also the quality. Using structured peer review, which I recommend to any journal in this room. Just give clear instructions to your reviewers. Ask per section of the manuscript, what is it that you want them to comment on? What we found out, to comment also, maybe this is not a question, but a complimentary comment to the panel's conversation. It's really difficult to bring authors to the level of enthusiasm to participate in this. From this experiment, we were asking authors, are you okay if we take these manuscripts to the service and get it done through that? We just got out of like 5 authors agreeing with that. So I think the lesson learned is that preprint communities need to be way more out there and promote. So this panel is great, but you need to do way more. And also, the fact that everything happens out of the system is a problem because journals run on some systems, and bringing in everything back is extra work for whoever is sitting on the journal. So for 5 manuscripts, maybe it's worth, but we need to also think about systematically interconnecting these disjointed workflows and systems together. I think these 2 need an attention, and the third one is identity. Specifically in the world where bad actors can disturb like the entire image of a journal, identity is a problem, and again, the connection of identities in between needs to be thoroughly taught. Thank you.
So could we talk a little bit about how you each engage with communities and try to build that kind of effort up a little? Some of the advocacy you do. So Eli, I don't know if you're still running the ambassador program, but that would be a good example, I think.
Yeah, so we have a Global South Committee, and indeed we have a webinar on Diamond Open Access, I think in early March, and we still have various advisory committees. I think one of the challenges we found with eLife is, like when eLife was launched, we had our USP, so to speak, was something called consultative peer review, which was involved when all the reviewers submitted their reports, then they had an online consultation, and all the reports were combined into a single decision letter that made clear what the authors had to do to revise paper. And that took a lot of effort just to get paper. That was a bit different to what referees were used to and what Redditors were used to, and it took an effort to do that. And this speaks to the point, actually, that was made earlier, like journals run on systems. But equally, most people, when they referee a paper, have an idea of what the referee report is like, and then suddenly you're confronted with a screen of different questions and things that publishers are looking for. But we've found, so the PRC model that we run now is even more complicated than the old thing we do. than our original model. So a lot of time and effort is just spent learning how to use that and operating it properly and teaching people, referees and editors indeed, how to use it. So I think probably a lot of our focus has gone on that, and you just hope that when people have used it, they've seen actually, yeah, there is a benefit to this. It was all a bit abstract before I went through it, either as a referee or an author, but now that I've been through it, I can see no, that's a very slow way to do things. You can't, but we have found equally, if you try and sell something abstract, that's difficult as well. So we just have to, emphasize what we see as the reasons we did it, the advantages of it, and hope that people somehow will follow us.
So bringing two of the points together, do you think something like PRC has been helpful or not? Because it's an extra thing that people have to learn. It takes away from talking about preprints and peer review.
I think one of the most radical things about what we did is hardly ever spoken, which the reason before we introduced PRC, we actually had a policy which we would only review papers that were available as preprints, and that policy existed for maybe a couple of years. And part of the reason for that is when we looked at the papers we had under review, most of them were available as preprints. And we thought, why not just make this a policy? Preprints are a good thing. They get the research out there straight away to as wide an audience as possible. So that, in a way, I think we felt was very definitely encouraging preprints. As Katherine said, lots of journals were a bit squeamish about preprints. And then it sort of flipped into sort of preprints almost as an author marketing tool. Contact the authors of preprints, see if you can get them to submit to your journal. So I think that was something we did that was sort of very supportive of preprints. And just while I have the floor, for me, the thing that sort of I find slightly worrying is the figure you give. Like, still only about 10% of the literature is pre-printed. And in a way, I think in an ideal world, everything would be pre-printed, but not everything would be peer-reviewed. There are articles that don't need to be peer-reviewed, but benefit from being published. So that the pre-print literature should be bigger than the journal literature, but I can't see that happening.
Yeah, can I just follow up quickly on that? Because I think that, what I think, eLife has taken a really bold step here, and I think that some of these other initiatives are doing some similar things. We are really trying to explore alternatives, but it is true that we are speaking at the moment to a small proportion of our community base. Even in our journals, which are very preprint friendly, it's a maximum of 40% papers that are pre-printed at the moment, although, one of our journals is looking at going further towards encouraging or mandating pre-printing. But, it's a little bit like speaking to the converted. And I think that we really need to have a big push to promote preprints in general, but also to promote these alternative models and make it clear to authors. And so I think we do have a very big piece of work to do to try and explain that to be now, some funders are now becoming much more preprint friendly and focused on those kinds of things. I think there are some changes in the air, but I do feel to some extent that, something needs to happen to make these models gain traction, and that thing hasn't really happened yet. And I think, eLife is perhaps the biggest success story within that, but we've got a lot of work to do there.
And yeah, so as a matter of fact, there is a very large difference in the understanding of all these processes, and even just preprinting between the researchers and between the professionals of the publication, like librarians, etc. All these people are very aware of PRC, preprinting, etc. But the scientists, the authors, they are not. They just don't know what is a preprint, what is PRC, etc., etc. And it is very difficult because some very small initiative like PCI, we don't have a communication department, we don't have a marketing department, so we cannot explain the world how we work and what is PRC and what are preprints. So what we try to do is just to make hundreds and hundreds of seminars and webinars in libraries, in laboratories, in departments, just to try to explain everybody what is a preprint, what is a peer-reviewed preprint, what is PRC. But this is very, very difficult. And a key contact point for that are the librarians. because they are at the junction between the scientists in the labs and the publication world, and they are very interested by this kind of initiative. So we try to contact the librarians. So if you are interested by getting some seminar from PCI in your library, do not hesitate, we are there for that. But yeah, so it's very important. The librarians are this contact point, and they are in the middle of something. And they have the
librarians are also really cool troublemakers, I've discovered. They're great activists. Any other questions from on the left, yeah?
Thank you. I'm Robert. I'm with a startup that is using AI to help discover scientifically impactful preprints. I'm wondering whether you've also considered using AI or some like crowd wisdom methods to kind of surface like the potentially most impactful preprints out of the mess of preprints that appear.
We've talked about it. I think that for us at Prelight, we're about the people. So for us, we're really about supporting people and having people's opinions, and that's what's really important in that perspective. But we have talked about, could you try and use AI tools to help identify those key preprints? At the moment we compile by hand, which is incredibly inefficient, monthly lists of preprints in fields, which surprisingly get read by thousands of people, just a list of preprints in their field. That for sure could be done far better using AI tools. I think that I know that Thomas Lemberger, who runs Review Commons, has been experimenting a lot with AI tools for categorizing preprints by field, and actually I believe that they're starting to think about using that for deciding which editors to assign submissions to Review Commons to. I don't think they're at that stage yet, but they're starting to look at it simply to try and help to triage the papers to the right people to get them seen. So I think those are the kinds of levels that at least I'm aware of that we're thinking about.
So I know Rapid Reviews are also, they're actively using AI to match their student reviewer pool up to sort of the right preprint, as it were. I don't know if Gareth is in the audience, but Gareth is developing a platform that is supposed to be helping to identify sort of novel preprints that should get a bit more of attention. Either of you using AI yet?
Not like that.
Yeah, we are using AI, but just for very basic stuff, administrative stuff and this kind of thing, so not scientific point of view. But what we may hope, or what we may see in the very close future, is that the authors will use AI, not to write, but to evaluate their own paper, and to help them to have other readers, like AI readers of their own articles. And this may be very, very efficient.
Yeah, so that's a good point. So if anyone's not aware, if you submit your preprint to, well, if you post your preprint to bioRxiv at the moment, you can then transfer that to QED, which is an AI review service that is designed at the moment, at least, to provide feedback for the authors of the preprint, which is, I've run stuff through, it's interesting. And a good, interesting. Any other questions? Right at the back in the middle.
Thanks. Dan Gorelick from Baylor College of Medicine. I'm speaking now totally as an author. Comment for Peter. I love the experiment. I do think it's a little bit of a misnomer. It should be called review, publish, review, curate, because there is that review up front by an editor. And I think if it was a true PRC model, you'd review everything, with the exception of paper mills. And there'd be a way for authors to search based on the 5, category qualitative assessment, like find all the zebrafish heart papers that were unconvincing or laudable or whatever. Great. But my real question is for Katherine. Review Commons, you started out by asking, how could Review Commons, be better? Why aren't more authors submitting? And I think from an author's perspective, it's because Review Commons already exists through Science Press, Cell Press, and Nature Publishing Group, right? So if I want to publish a paper in a Cell Press journal, right, I can submit to Cell, and if it's rejected, with or without a review, it can be transferred, and then if it's reviewed by sell reports but reject it. I can transfer it to Neuron or Card Biology or wherever. And I think if Review Commons is really going to work, it needs to be a marketplace where all the three big publishers, plus all the independents like company biologists and the societies, could, work together to all decide to share reviews. Do you think that's feasible? Is there any, could this happen?
So I think that, one of the reasons for setting up Review Commons was recognizing that problem, that we as small society publishers can't compete with those big trickle-down systems that happen at, particularly, I think, Springer Nature and Cell Press. And I think, I think that one perhaps slight difference between those systems, I would argue, is that the power in Review Commons is more in the hands of the authors. So it's not that, you go to Review Commons, you then submit the paper to your top journal choice within that set of affiliates, and they then say, no, we don't want it, but why don't you go here? They say, we don't want it, and then you choose to go where next. So I think the power is more in the hands of the authors in the case of Review Commons. Now, as I said, Review Commons was set up with exclusively not-for-profit publishers. They do now have one journal that has Embo Journal is published by Springer Nature, but they do now have one, I believe, Springer Nature-owned journal. In there, will it expand to some of those big things? It's been discussed. And I don't think that there have been any decisions made about what direction to take it in, but for sure that is one of the things that would make it grow. But I think that there are some issues there.
There was a question at the back on the right, still yet.
Hello, Jennifer Smith, City St George's, University of London. That's one of the very long institution names Mark was talking about yesterday. Yes, in terms of a comment from one of our Elsevier colleagues, attendees here, in terms of, and it speaks to the last point, in terms of the portability and the need to connect disjointed workflows, I guess, as you've just been discussing, it would need some sort of coalition of the willing, and there's a lot of publishers in this room. Could they sort of workshop a basic viable system, basic viable requirements to help enable portability and open up choices and make things easier for the authors to choose? And yeah, that's my comment, question, whatever.
They could.
So I was having this conversation yesterday, and I think one of the things I find when I go to these kind of conferences, I did this at OASRA a couple of years ago, is you talk to a funder and they'll blame all the problems on a publisher or a researcher. And you talk to a publisher and publisher and they'll blame, the funders or the institutions. And unless all of those actors get together in a room and actually work on things collaboratively, I don't see much real progress if you just get one of those groups trying to do something. I think it really needs buy-in from everybody, and not just buy-in from everybody, but making sure that it's not just the same people from those groups attending these kind of things. And if you want a coalition of the willing, you need some of the big names, but you also need the people who are actually doing all the research. You need a lot of those researchers in there. And this is very pessimistic, but I don't see that happening. But I would love it to happen, because I think if that happened, we'd start to see some real, actual change and progress.
But I think that, the depressing thing is that we're so far away from that at this point. So, as an example that, at our journals and at many journals, we will tell authors, if you got rejected from another journal, please send us your paper with their reviews and we will try and make a decision based on that. Now, it's really useful for us to know who those reviewers were when we're making a decision. It's not essential, but it's really useful. And there are some journals, eLife, who will happily tell us who those reviewers were. But there are other journals who refuse. So even if the authors wanted them to tell us, even if the reviewers were happy, their policy is that they will not share the names of their reviewers with journals outside their publishing house. And if we can't even do that, then the idea that we're all going to get together and have a coalition, I think, is a long way away. And I think that, and there are lots of reasons for that, but I just think we are a long way away from any kind of big concerted effort that is going to work cross-publisher, cross-system, cross everything.
There's a question down the right still, yeah.
From Librata. I have a question about, the adoption of people putting stuff on, preprint. So as an author, I would imagine that I'd want to put it on as many preprint servers as possible, because I want to maximize visibility for my work. But clearly it's more complicated than that. Could you speak a bit to the nuance of why there's this hesitation to put your work on preprints and why preprint servers haven't had universal adoption across fields?
So a lot of preprint servers won't allow you to cross-post, and there's a bunch of reasons why they do that. In terms of the adoption question, so I haven't got it in the slides here, but if you look at the report I did, there's a lot of data in there around it. You can track all the different fields in biology, for example, in terms of preprint adoption, and 3 stand out. So you've got bioinformatics and neuroscience. They adopted quite readily. They're doing amazing. And then the other one is cell biology. And I think the only reason cell biology is doing quite well compared to the other fields is because, we had Ron Vale set up ASAP Bio, and they spent almost 10 years putting a lot of effort into talking primarily to cell biologists. And that kind of advocacy, that's what's missing, that's what's needed. It's also what nobody wants to fund because it takes a long time to do and it's difficult to do. A lot of the other fields, so clinical fields in particular, have been quite slow to adopt preprints. That is more from the perspective of, it's clinical, it's a bit more human health relevant, there's a bit more of a desire for that to be peer reviewed, there's those extra steps to be in place, which is, I agree, I don't think we should be reviewing everything, but that is a case where maybe those things should be peer reviewed. But ultimately it comes down, I think, largely just a huge amount of grassroots efforts. Is there a counterpoint there? No? I'll let you have the mic then.
No, I'd just like to add from my experience why people are reluctant to use preprint servers. And it's beginning to change, but I still get people who tell me, I don't want to put my stuff on a preprint server because people will scoop me. They'll read what I've done, and they'll do it before I get a chance to make the actual publication. And I say to them, no, it's exactly the opposite. If you keep your results in a bottom drawer, somebody is going to scoop you. But if you get a DOI for your work, then that's not going to happen. And I think that's slowly changing, but I still see that in a lot of particularly younger people who don't kind of understand, which is surprising. I would have thought it'd be people like me who didn't understand, but it's not, it's the opposite.
And this comes down to that sort of communicating what they are. When you talk to people about preprints, there are a number of persistent myths based like that have been around since they started. I mean, they started many, many, many years ago, but if you take it from bioRxiv in 2013, those myths existed then, and they're just as strong now. And I've spent the past 10 years trying to get rid of those and combat them, and it's a really challenging thing to do. But again, it's a huge barrier that it should be simple to overcome, but for some reason isn't. We're coming towards the end, so does anyone in the room really hate preprints? Or preprint review? That went up really quickly. Give that man a microphone. So, a question to get a question. What is your biggest barrier to why you really, really hate preprints? You almost jumped at the chance, so go for it.
First, I'm David Haber. I work for a publisher.
That's
so
why.
Context. I fear 2 things. They're totally uncontrolled, unregulated in a way. And the funders behind those preprints are not open. I really worry about what's happening when researchers put their preprints up there and have no clue what is happening behind the scenes. I also worry about the perception of what preprints are in the world at large, because basically it's free advertising. And you see it, you see corporations putting up preprints, and even though it's not the case that DOIs represent some sort of stamp of approval, in the public they do, and that's a problem. And so I think the underpinning of preprints are dangerous and harmful.
Anyone like to challenge that?
So,
God, where to start? You know, the fact that the public know what a DOI is, I would question that. And I think questioning that, I'd question the basis of almost everything you say. To say they're free advertising, like a publication, as its name implies, is making something public, is a form of advertising, if you insist. I think companies that want advertising have got teams of marketeers and press releases and social media experts. If they want to go for publicity, there's countless ways they can do it. You know, sticking a PDF on BioArchive would be pretty low down the list of ways that they would do. So, I don't understand, maybe it would be helpful if you could explain sort of the underpinnings. You said something about that which I just didn't understand.
So maybe I can, so I've just written, ironically, an article questioning whether open science is actually that open or scientific, just to make sure everyone hates me. But I think there is an element where some of the open science movement they're a little bit too detached from researchers, they're a little bit too detached from the aims of the movement, and I feel there's becoming a bit of a disillusionment with open science. So a lot of the researchers I've spoken to, I had one the other day, he said he hates open science because it's making his work harder. It's making it harder, it's more effort to do his research. So I think that is starting to creep in a little bit, and I've written the article that hopefully course correct, but I think those things are starting to bubble up a little bit now. And I think a lot of the funders are viewed a little bit skeptically, because it's HHMI, right? It's the same kind of these big funders who can afford to take risks, who fund the same kind of things, and I think there's a bit of from the outside, there's a little bit of a skepticism there. Yeah. But we are at time, so if you two want to take that outside afterwards, it's on you. But thank you to everyone on the panel and for the questions.